Clemson blew out Georgia Tech at home 42-21, and now we look ahead to North Carolina as Drake Maye comes to town. To help me preview that matchup, Jordan Bowman joins the channel. Jordan is part of Mark Rogers' Voice of College Football. You could find him on YouTube. Be sure to do that after watching this. Jordan, thanks for joining, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Glad to be here. Just a great weekend. Enjoyed it. Clemson got the win. Lots of takeaways, and I'm sure we're going to get down into it. Yeah,
so let's start with Georgia Tech. We'll probably spend more time on North Carolina, but let's just hit a couple points on Georgia Tech here. Cade Klubnik, 4 touchdowns, only 1 pick. He went over 200 yards. He was pretty good, but kind of a little bit the story of the season. He was inconsistent again. He had a really bad pick. He doesn't always see the open receivers. Your thoughts on him, and in particular, did you see anything in this game against Georgia Tech that makes you optimistic for 2024, pessimistic for 2024? Any more direction you got from this game against the Yellow Jackets?
Yeah, just really watching Cade, I felt like early in this game, it seemed like that it was kind of tight. I felt like the offense as a whole was kind of tight, and I think it started with Cade. Between the run game, the offensive line not getting much push, and just some of the throws were a little errant. But I think once you saw them kind of complete some first downs, especially that third drive, after the Georgia Tech score, I really thought you saw him settle in a little bit, hit the open receivers. It wasn't an overly explosive day. But I thought Cade played one of his better games of the year, by far. 4 touchdown passes. The 1 pick, not great, but all in all, you saw some really, really nice flashes, and kind of some signs that maybe he's starting to figure things out a little bit. And, that gives me some optimism now. I will say Georgia Tech's defense, certainly not one of the best, but I think that Cade, just as a quarterback and just kind of executing the offense and managing the game, I thought he made some strides on Saturday.
So let's talk about the offensive line. You mentioned them. They did get off to a bad start. First 2 drives, I mean, there's really no sugarcoating. They were terrible. PFF rated a lot of the different guys pretty poorly. They had to shuffle guys in and out. Harris Sewell got replaced by Mitchell Mays. Colin Sadler played some left guard. They're missing Walker Parks, who's out for the year. Now they're also missing Marcus Tate. But, getting them back, I don't know if that is a fix-all for 2024. What's your thoughts? I mean, sure, this year, but I think more interestingly and importantly, what's your thoughts on the future of this offensive line for 2024?
Yeah, I think just watching this game and really this offensive line throughout the course of the year, and it really was pretty eye-opening that this team does not have a whole lot of consistency week to week in terms of who's ready to play and who's not, and who's making those preparations needed and consistent in their preparation. Because last week you mentioned Trent Howard and Harris Sewell like being kind of playing bigger roles in that Notre Dame game, and then starting this week they weren't ready to go, and you saw Colin Sadler slide in at left guard and Mitchell Mays get in there. This group is not. From week to week is not consistently ready to play. And I mean, there's not many schools that are really, at the top of college football that are shuffling offensive linemen in and out every week like Clemson has been. And I think that's something that, needs to be fixed. But I think you do see the talent at times. And I think simplifying some of the blocking schemes definitely helped. But I think moving forward, we have to start seeing some consistency, and we need to start seeing guys separate themselves from the pack, because it doesn't feel like this team has 5 starting caliber players. It feels like they're, from one week to another, it could be this 5 or it could be another 5. And, when it comes to beating the really good teams and, in the league and, out of conference, you can't keep doing that. And if Clemson wants to get back to where they had been previously, it starts with the offensive line starting, to find itself. And, maybe you find something in 2024. I still think the room is talented, but like I said, you got to start finding some consistency there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that maybe I hadn't considered. Is a guy like Trent Howard has a great game against Notre Dame, and then he's not able to play the whole game the very next week, and I think we're seeing that too often. And I don't know what the solution necessarily is, but it's peculiar for sure. One other thing on this on this Georgia Tech game before we turn it over to North Carolina, obviously the defense has been awesome. 4 picks, and even more encouraging than the fact there was 4 interceptions against Haynes King, who, he had 10 picks, but he's generally been pretty good overall. But they were all from freshmen and redshirt freshmen. So that's not only encouraging for, these last 2 games and the bowl, but that's encouraging for the next 3 years, right? Last year, and part of it was deserved, Wes Goodwin got some flack from fans, right? The defense took a step back. People were kind of questioning, everyone was questioning originally if the internal hires were the right move. And obviously the Streeter one was already proven not to be. But I think that now Wes has sort of proven it. Obviously next year they're going to lose a ton of guys, and that's when he'll really prove it. But I feel really good about this defense for the remainder of this year. And honestly, I feel good about Wes, the young guys, and they might need 1 transfer, but I don't even think they need that much for next year. I think they could be really good again. I'm buying Wes Goodwin. Are you?
I think I am too. And I think this year was a huge step in the right direction. I think from Wes as a play caller, from as a coordinator, I think he's really growing into his role. I felt like his first season in 2022, I mean, he had a lot of talent to work with on that roster. And it kind of felt, like he was calling the games tight. Like it felt like, he didn't really want to be too aggressive or do, things that were really out of the ordinary. It felt like he wanted to let his talent do the talking, but and he wasn't necessarily as creative with maybe some of his blitz packages and stuff like that, and really scheming guys in a way to get them in positions to succeed. I think this year you're starting to see the defense take more of an identity, and it's not just we have really talented players and we're going to let our talented players win those individual matchups. I think he's doing things to make create opportunities for these guys, and I think that's the difference, and that's something that Brent Venables was able to do very well. Now, I'm not saying Wes Goodwin is Brent Venables, but I think he's starting to find himself a little bit. He's not the same coordinator as Brent, but I think he is coming into his own, and I think the development of the young guys and the flashes they've shown. You mentioned the freshman defensive backs and some of the young defensive linemen and linebackers. I think there's a lot of talent, even after this year, and I think there's going to be a lot to work with. And I think Wes has definitely stepped into his role a lot more, and he's a lot more comfortable in the skin now.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think we saw the most notable example to me was the Wake Forest game last year when the cornerbacks just couldn't hold up, and it took like 3.5 quarters before he sort of gave up and said, okay, they're not good enough right now. They're not good enough yet. Let's just play more conservative kind of zone stuff. And then you see Clemson was able to finally get a stop in the game. This year, he hasn't been as maybe slow to adapt to in-game things. I think that's been a big difference. Let's flip it over. Let's talk about UNC. Before we get on that, I just want to remind people, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please do so. It really helps it grow. We're getting close to 600. So thank you to everyone who has subscribed. And if you haven't, please do so. All right, Jordan, let's talk a little bit of UNC. I want to start big picture. It's interesting to me after Clemson lost to Miami, my mindset was, don't fall apart. Obviously don't lose out and quit on the coaching staff. But basically just win the rivalry games and let's get to next year, right? So that was, at the time it was NC State, it was Georgia Tech, and it's South Carolina, right? It's not North Carolina. So I'm looking at this and, we're talking, if we win, maybe we can get to 8 wins. If we lose, maybe it's a 7-5 kind of season. But really it's hard for me to not look ahead to the Palmetto Bowl. Frankly, I don't know that I've watched a Clemson conference game with such low stakes in 10, 12, 13 years, something like that. So tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why fans should be excited about this UNC game.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's another opportunity to get a ranked win at home. I mean, this is the final stretch of a a nice little home stretch for Clemson, and it would be a really nice cap to that before heading to the Palmetto Bowl. And I think while Clemson and North Carolina, they're certainly not rivals. It's not a game that's been played very often. I think it's a good football team coming in, and it's a game that you need to be prepared for. And it's senior day. I think there are a lot of guys that are in their third, fourth plus year that are will likely not be on the team next year. That you feel like you want to send them off with a win, and I think it's a tough matchup. I mean, this is one of the better offenses you faced all season, and they're a good football team. And so I think while the stakes, you're right, the stakes themselves aren't really high. I still think this is an important game from kind of putting a cap to the home season, because it wouldn't really feel right. It wouldn't feel right if Clemson lost 2 games at home in a season. We haven't said something like that in a long time. So I think this game has a lot of stakes as far as that is concerned. And it would just be a great opportunity to get another kind of confidence boosting win, before you go to Columbia, which was announced today is a night game. So that's going to be a hell of a experience as well.
Yeah, that's a good point about it being at home and being senior day for so many of these kids. You definitely want to send them out with a win, especially after a tough kind of disappointing year. And this is the class that hasn't won a national championship, so let them go out with a win, have some momentum going to the offseason, and of course the bowls, right? The Palmetto Bowl and the actual bowl. All right. So speaking of that, I mean, you want to get a win and go off on a good note. UNC's offense is awesome, obviously led by Drake Maye at quarterback. He leads the ACC in passing yards, 3,145. For reference, Cade has 2,261. So 884 yards behind Drake Maye. Pretty good bit. That's not really a ding on Cade as much as a compliment to Drake Maye. And UNC has some bad losses. They lost to Georgia Tech, who Clemson obviously just beat, and they lost to Virginia, who only has 2 wins. So those are bad losses, but they're 8-2. Clemson is 6-4, and Clemson's the touchdown favorite. I know they're at home, but it's weird because you look at the numbers and you're like, that shouldn't be right, but it also feels right to me. Does it feel right to you?
Yeah, I think so. I think just considering how North Carolina's played recently, I think it kind of makes a lot of sense. Obviously, these Vegas odds are beyond what the ranking next to the team is, and I do think Clemson has played really well at home, and it's a tough environment. We know how this matchup went last year. And I think this is a situation where you have 2 teams that are kind of trending in the opposite direction, sort of. I think North Carolina's defense, I thought was playing well at the very beginning of the year. But since then, you started to see the lapses and kind of the revert back to kind of the North Carolina defenses we've known out of the Mac Brown era for the past few seasons. And I think, while Clemson's offense has struggled for most of the year, I think if these last few weeks were any indication, Clemson can score on mediocre to bad defenses. And I think North Carolina is kind of starting to show signs that they might be that. And so you combine that with how Clemson's defense has been playing as of late. I think it makes a lot of sense to be at home in the touchdown favorite. It feels about right. Now, this is a game that Clemson absolutely can lose because of the firepower that North Carolina has, and Drake Maye might be, the second quarterback taken off of the board in next year's draft. But I think this is about the right number. Maybe you could argue it should be a little bit shorter, but I think Clemson is playing really good football right now, and I think they're every bit as capable of winning this game as North Carolina, if not more.
Yeah, and the thing that gives me optimism for Clemson is, when you look at a couple different stats, but in particular, if you look at yards per play, the best unit in the game is Clemson's defense. And then it's North Carolina's offense. And then there's a pretty big drop off. When Clemson's offense is on the field, it's kind of a mediocre offense versus a mediocre defense. And that's maybe putting it nicely. But when when UNC's offense is on the field against Clemson's defense, those are some elite units right there. And if I'm picking any one unit, if I'm drafting units, it's Clemson's defense. It's the best of the group. They're 8th nationally in yards per play at 4.4 yards allowed per play. All right. So one thing you did kind of reference is their defense is kind of regressing a little bit. They allowed what was it, 45 against Duke. It was double overtime, but nonetheless, that was without Riley Leonard. So it's, to me, even though the better unit is UNC offense versus Clemson defense, the more fun thing sometimes to watch is what's Clemson's offense going to do when they have an opportunity against a weaker defense. Last year, they went off, right? They went off for 39 points. Cade Klubnik had what maybe is still his best game of his career, 20 for 24, 279 with a touchdown against UNC in the ACC championship game. That's the game that gave everyone so much hope about him, about what this offense could be really with him. So what are reasonable expectations? I don't think you pick him to go 20 for 24 again, but could Clemson put up 35 or so? Could there be a little bit of offense here that gives fans optimism? I think the defense playing great would be obviously good, but I don't think that yields a ton of optimism for progress for the future. Can the offense break out? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there'll definitely be opportunities. I do think this North Carolina defense, when I look at them, when I watch them play, I think what stands out is, I think their front seven is in a better place than it's been as of late. I think you're starting to see, they had recruited really well, especially along the defensive line for a little bit. And it's kind of taken them a while to get going, but I think this year they've taken some strides. So I think that'll be an interesting matchup considering, the changes that Clemson continues to go through along the offensive line. But I think the back end has definitely taken them to a huge step back. And I think they haven't necessarily gotten as much pressure in recent weeks as they had at the beginning of the season. And I think this Clemson offense can have some success. And if, as long as they have a complementary run game, I feel like Cade Klubnik can do enough, through the air to keep this offense ahead of schedule. And you saw it against Georgia Tech. When things were balanced, Cade was pretty crisp. He was, strong in his reads. He scrambled to make some plays. I think he'll be able to do that on Saturday. It seems like that injury is starting to heal a little bit. I think 35 points is attainable, and I feel like that should be enough to win. I think Clemson's defense will be able to limit North Carolina enough at home to where that's a reasonable score, and I think you should feel comfortable about winning. But again, it's going to be tough, and we have seen this Clemson offense sputter at times, at inopportune times, and obviously the great equalizer is turnovers. We've seen an improvement over the last couple of weeks in that aspect, but you never know. Maybe the Duke version of Clemson shows up again, or NC State or Miami. Like maybe that version of Clemson shows up. You just don't know with this team, but. If the last couple of weeks are any indication and is an indication of a positive trend, then Clemson, if they take care of the football, they should have some offensive success.
Yeah, and one thing you mentioned about turnovers, there is such a thing as turnover luck, and that's not to say that Clemson's turnovers were just unlucky. I think that's very frustrating when people say that. What I do think is unlucky is that their fumbles get returned for touchdowns, their picks get returned for touchdowns, their other fumbles are on the 1 yard line. Clemson had a fairly bad interception against Georgia Tech, but it wasn't incredibly consequential, right? It didn't turn into an immediate touchdown. And I think that's where the luck has evened out. So I agree with you. I think Clemson can put up some points. I'm actually leaning towards Clemson winning, even though the 7-point spread feels right, but looks weird, I guess. But as long as they avoid the catastrophe again, I do think they can win. My pick will be 35-28. The implied score from Vegas with a 7-point spread and a 58-point over-under is about 33-26. So I'm right around there, slightly over. Jordan, I don't know if you want to save your pick for your Thursday show, but I'll let you end with a with a pick, or or tell folks where they could find you on YouTube.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll save the final score prediction, but I will give my pick. I think Clemson does find a way to win this game, and I think it would be a great cap, like I said, to that this little 3 run stretch of home games that I feel like Clemson desperately needed after basically a month of being on the road, and you're starting to see team get a little bit more comfortable. I think this is certainly a tough matchup, but especially on the offensive side of the football. But I think that we've seen enough from this defense, the secondary in particular, that I feel like you can trust your defensive backs to make enough plays and take some things away that North Carolina likes to do in the passing game. Now it will, and I think they've done a good job of limiting the run game as well. I think especially last week, Georgia Tech had some success early. I said last week, but Saturday, Georgia Tech had some success early on in the run, and they kind of made some adjustments and shut it down. And that kind of, made that offense one-dimensional. I think you can do the same thing with North Carolina. They have a good running back in Amari and Hampton, but you can stop them if you can take that running game away and the defensive backs hold up like they have all season. I think you should be in pretty good shape. So I like Clemson to win. And that, with that being said, of course, you can find me at Clemson, the voice of college football, the YouTube channel. I do a show every Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, called The All In Show with me and my co-host Tiger Paul Craven. Good time. We talk about the games. We talk about other things within the Clemson football sphere, and we also do the post-game show at the end of every single Clemson game on Saturday. And of course, we'll be doing that probably around, I guess, 7 o'clock ish, depending on when the North Carolina game ends. So yeah, be sure to check us out there too. And thank you, Ryan, for having me on. It's been great.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone go check out Jordan over on his YouTube channel. And as always, go Tigers.